Ambassador Kreloth stepped off his shuttle and immediately felt uncomfortable. The human colony ship called Perseverance was nothing like the grand vessels of the Galactic Concordat. The corridors were narrow and cluttered with pipes and wiring that hung from the ceiling. His 4 eyes darted around, taking in every detail with growing doubt about these creatures. The humans themselves were tiny. When Kreloth stood at his full height, most of them barely came up to the middle of his chest. They had no scales, no protective shells, no claws or fangs. Just soft pink or brown skin that looked like it would tear at the slightest touch. Their ships were held together with welded metal plates and what appeared to be industrial adhesive. Everything looked recycled, repurposed, or salvaged from somewhere else. These beings seemed fragile, almost pathetically so. A human male approached him with confidence that seemed misplaced given his species' obvious weakness. He wore a dark blue uniform with patches sewn onto the shoulders. His hair was cut short and starting to gray at the temples. "Welcome, Ambassador," the human said, holding out his hand palm up in that strange gesture they used for greeting. "I'm Commander Jack Hayes. We're honored to have someone from the Concordat visit our little home out here." Kreloth reached out with one of his claws and briefly touched the man's hand. The skin was warm and impossibly soft. How did these creatures survive anything? "Indeed," Kreloth said, his words emerging from the translation device strapped to his chest. It converted his natural clicking and chittering sounds into human language. "I have been sent to evaluate whether your settlement on Epsilon 7 meets the minimum standards for colony recognition." Commander Hayes nodded and gestured down the corridor. "Let me show you around. I think you'll be impressed with what we've managed to build." As they walked, Kreloth looked out through one of the viewing ports. The ice moon of Epsilon 7 filled the window, a massive ball of frozen water and rock. The surface temperature there dropped to levels that would freeze solid most of the species in the known galaxy. The atmosphere was so dense and heavy that it would crush an unprotected person flat within seconds. Massive storms of frozen debris swept across the surface every few days, traveling at speeds that turned ice chunks into deadly projectiles. It was, by any reasonable measure, one of the worst places in the sector to try to build a colony. Yet somehow these humans had not only landed there but appeared to be thriving. Over the next 3 days, Commander Hayes arranged for Kreloth to tour every part of their operation. A woman named Beth Clark, who served as their chief engineer, took him deep below the ice to see their power plants. The humans had drilled down to where the moon's core still held ancient heat, capturing that energy to power their entire settlement. "We generate about 3 times what we need on a daily basis," Beth explained as they rode an elevator that descended for what felt like forever. "The excess gets stored in battery banks scattered across the colony." "Why store so much?" Kreloth asked. Beth gave him a look that suggested the answer should be obvious. "Because the storms sometimes damage our surface collection arrays. When that happens, we need to have enough power stored to keep everyone alive until repairs are finished." Everything the humans showed him followed this same pattern. In the medical bay, a doctor named Robert Turner walked him through their food production systems. Rows and rows of plants grew under artificial lights, their roots suspended in nutrient-rich water rather than soil. "We grow 17 different varieties of vegetables and grains," Robert explained, his hands moving as he spoke. "Each one has different nutritional requirements and growth cycles. That way if disease hits one crop, we don't lose everything." The pattern continued everywhere. They had 2 separate water recycling systems in case one failed. 3 different communication arrays pointed at various relay satellites. 4 independent life support processors scattered throughout the colony. The humans seemed obsessed with having multiple backup plans for everything. On the 3rd evening, Kreloth was reviewing his notes in the quarters they'd given him when Commander Hayes stopped by. "What do you think so far, Ambassador?" Hayes asked, leaning against the doorframe. "You seem excessively prepared for disaster," Kreloth observed. "Most species build efficient systems with perhaps one backup. You have backups for your backups and then additional backups beyond that." Hayes smiled, but there was something serious in his eyes. "That's because disaster isn't a possibility out here, Ambassador. It's a certainty. The question isn't if something will go wrong. The question is when it goes wrong, will we be ready?" "An interesting philosophy," Kreloth said. "Where does such thinking come from?" The commander was quiet for a moment. "Our homeworld isn't available anymore. Long story, but the short version is we learned the hard way that you can't count on things staying stable. You can't assume help will come. You can only count on yourself and the people around you. So we prepare. We plan. We make sure that when the bad day comes, we survive it." Kreloth nodded slowly. Perhaps these humans were more resilient than they appeared, even if they did look fragile. On the fourth day, just as Kreloth was preparing his preliminary report, the alarms started blaring throughout the ship. The lights shifted to a pulsing red, and human crew members started running through the corridors with purpose. Commander Hayes's voice came over the communication system, calm but urgent. All personnel to stations. This is not a drill. We have incoming vessels and they are not friendly. Repeat, this is not a drill. Kreloth felt his blood go cold. Out here, at the edge of explored space, there was only one group that attacked colonies. Pirates had found them. He rushed to the command center, his legs carrying him faster than he'd moved in years. When he arrived, Commander Hayes stood in front of a large display screen showing the space around their colony. 12 large ships were approaching, with dozens of smaller fighters swarming around them like insects. What is happening? Kreloth demanded. Hayes didn't look away from the screen. Korthak's warband. They're the worst of the worst out here. Slavers mostly. They hit colonies, take what they want, and disappear before anyone can respond. A communication request flashed on the screen. Hayes accepted it and a hideous alien face appeared. The creature looked like something from a nightmare, all teeth and scars. The pirates' demands were simple and brutal. Give us half your supplies. Give us all your medicine. And give us 20 of your people to sell in the slave markets. Refuse and they would destroy the entire colony. Kreloth waited for Hayes to begin evacuation procedures. There was no shame in running from a force this powerful. The Concordat itself had tried and failed to stop the Korthak's warband multiple times. But Commander Hayes just looked at the screen for a long moment. Then he leaned forward and spoke one word. No. The sharp wail of the alarm tore through the Perseverance at exactly 6 in the morning. Kreloth had been reviewing his notes in his quarters when the sound started, a rising and falling scream that made his scales itch with instinctive fear. He'd heard alarms before on other ships, but this one felt different. This one felt real. He scrambled out of his room and followed the flow of running humans toward the command center. Nobody was panicking, which somehow made it worse. They all moved with quick efficiency, their faces set and determined. When Kreloth burst through the command center doors, he saw Commander Hayes standing perfectly still in front of a large holographic display that showed the space around their colony. Hayes looked like he'd been carved from granite. His jaw was tight, his eyes fixed on the screen, and his hands rested on the edge of the console in front of him. He didn't even glance over when Kreloth entered. What's happening? Kreloth gasped, trying to catch his breath. Pirate fleet just dropped out of hyperspace, Hayes said. His voice was eerily calm, like he was discussing the weather. Korthak's warband. We're counting 12 heavy cruisers and about 40 smaller fighter craft. They'll be in weapons range in 8 minutes. Kreloth felt all 4 of his hearts skip a beat. The Korthak's warband. Even saying the name out loud was considered bad luck in some parts of the galaxy. They were the worst kind of pirates, the kind that didn't just steal your cargo and leave. They were slavers, torturers, and killers who seemed to enjoy causing pain. In the past year alone, they'd completely wiped out 3 separate colonies, leaving nothing but floating debris and distress beacons that screamed into empty space forever. You need to evacuate immediately, Kreloth said, his voice cracking with urgency. Get your people into whatever ships can fly and scatter in different directions. Some of you might escape if you move right now. We're not evacuating, Hayes replied. His tone was completely flat, without any emotion at all. But your mining vessels, your cargo ships, they can't possibly stand against military cruisers. You have no warships, no defensive platforms, no. This is our home, Ambassador. Hayes finally turned to look at him. We're not running. Then you're going to die. Kreloth practically shouted. All of you. Your entire colony will be erased, and I'll die with you because my shuttle can't outrun their fighters. Before Hayes could respond, a crackling sound filled the command center. One of the screens switched to show a transmission coming from the pirate fleet. The face that appeared made Kreloth want to look away. It belonged to something that might have been from any number of species, but was now covered in so many scars, implants, and modifications that it looked more like a walking corpse than a living being. The voice that came through was rough and brutal, speaking in broken galactic common. Human colony. You listen now. We take half your food, half your fuel, all your medicine. You also give us 20 of your people. Healthy ones. We sell them. You do this, maybe we let rest of you live. You refuse, we kill everyone. You have 5 minutes to decide. The transmission cut off, leaving the command center in silence. Kreloth looked around at the human faces surrounding him. Some looked scared, which was reasonable. Some looked angry, which was understandable. But none of them looked like they were preparing to surrender or evacuate. Hayes stepped closer to his communication console. He pressed a button and leaned toward the microphone. Kreloth held his breath, waiting to hear what compromise the commander would offer, what negotiation he would attempt. No, Hayes said. That was it. Just one word. Just a simple refusal. The pirate transmission came back immediately, the scarred face twisted in rage. You refuse? Then you die. The screen went dark. 3 seconds later, the Perseverance shook as weapons fire hammered into their shields. Kreloth grabbed onto a railing to keep from falling. The lights flickered. More alarms started blaring. The holographic display showed bright streaks of energy weapons flying from the pirate cruisers toward the colony. This was it. This was how it ended. Kreloth began mentally composing the prayer his people said when facing death. At least it would be quick. The pirates would probably just destroy the Perseverance first, and he wouldn't have to see what they did to the colonists. Then a young human at one of the tactical stations spoke up. His name was Dan Tucker, and he was the officer in charge of defensive systems. Commander, all units are in position. Requesting permission to activate Protocol Prometheus. Hayes nodded once. Activate it. All units, weapons free. Dan's fingers flew across his console. Protocol Prometheus is active. All units, you are weapons free. Repeat, all units weapons free. Kreloth stared at the holographic display, trying to understand what he was seeing. Every single human vessel in the area was suddenly lighting up with weapon signatures. The mining ships that had been sitting dormant near the asteroid fields. The cargo haulers that had been transporting supplies between the colony and the Perseverance. The small personnel shuttles that carried workers back and forth. Even the salvage tugs and maintenance craft. All of them. Every single one. What is this? Kreloth whispered. What am I looking at? Beth Clark, the chief engineer, was standing at a nearby station. She glanced over at him and her expression was hard as steel. We weaponized everything, Ambassador. Every single ship we have. But those are civilian vessels. Mining equipment. Cargo transports. They were, Beth said. Now watch what they can do. On the display, the mining ship closest to the pirate fleet fired what should have been its or extraction laser. But the beam that shot out was far more powerful than any mining tool should be. It punched straight through the shields of a pirate fighter and cut the small ship in half. A cargo hauler opened its loading bay doors. Instead of containers, missiles streaked out, dozens of them, swarming toward the nearest pirate cruiser. A personnel shuttle that couldn't have been more than 20 meters long suddenly accelerated to impossible speeds, weaving through a cloud of incoming fire. It had something attached to its hull that definitely hadn't been there during Kreloth's tour. How? Kreloth managed to ask. How is this possible? Commander Hayes was watching the battle unfold with intense focus, calling out orders in a steady stream. But he spared a moment to answer. We learned a long time ago that the galaxy is a dangerous place. Nobody's coming to save us if we get in trouble. So we made sure we could save ourselves. You converted civilian ships into weapons? We made them dual purpose, Beth corrected. They still mine or transport cargo just fine. But when we need them to fight, they can fight. Another human at a communication station called out. Commander, the pirate fleet is breaking formation. They're trying to flank us from 3 directions. Anticipated, Hayes replied calmly. Deploy the second wave. Target their engines. I don't want any of them making it to hyperspace. Second wave deploying now. Kreloth watched as more human vessels emerged from positions hidden among the asteroid fields and behind chunks of ice debris. They'd been waiting there, invisible to scanners, ready to spring a trap. The pirates had thought they were attacking a defenseless mining colony. Instead, they'd flown straight into an ambush. A massive explosion lit up the display as one of the pirate cruisers lost containment and blew apart from the inside. Then another explosion. Then a third. Ambassador, Hayes said without looking away from the battle, you might want to hold on to something. This is going to get rough. What happened next could only be described as complete chaos, but somehow it was organized chaos. Kreloth watched the holographic display as 47 human vessels of all different sizes and types descended on the pirate fleet like a swarm of angry insects attacking something that had disturbed their nest. There was no military formation, at least not in any way that Kreloth recognized from his study of galactic warfare. The humans didn't fly in neat rows or maintain defensive positions around larger ships. Instead, they seemed to be everywhere at once, darting in and out, attacking from impossible angles, appearing and disappearing so fast that the pirate targeting systems couldn't keep up. But despite the apparent chaos, they moved together with frightening coordination. Ships would break away just before friendly fire could hit them. Vessels would sweep in to cover each other when one was taking too much damage. It was like watching a school of fish move as one organism, except these fish had teeth. A mining ship that looked like it should be drilling into asteroids fired its primary laser at a pirate cruiser. The beam, which was designed to cut through solid ice and rock, sliced into the cruiser's hull plating like it was paper. Atmosphere vented into space in a massive plume of frozen air and debris. One of the cargo haulers, the kind meant for transporting supplies between stations, opened its main loading bay. But instead of containers full of food or equipment, missiles shot out in rapid succession. 12 of them, then 20, then 30, all screaming toward the nearest pirate ships on trails of white-hot exhaust. A small personnel shuttle, the kind that usually carried maybe 6 or 7 workers, suddenly accelerated to speeds that should have torn it apart. The pilot was flying it like a fighter jet, weaving through incoming weapons fire with moves that made Krelotha's stomach turn just watching. The shuttle had something attached to its underside, some kind of explosive charge. The pilot aimed straight for a pirate fighter, getting closer and closer until Kreloth was sure there would be a collision. At the last possible second, a small escape pod shot out from the bottom of the shuttle. The pod veered hard to the left while the shuttle continued straight ahead, slamming into the pirate fighter's engine section. The explosion was massive, taking out not just the fighter but 2 others that had been flying nearby. "Your people are completely insane," Kreloth shouted over the sound of alarms and status reports being called out across the command center. Commander Hayes kept his eyes locked on the tactical display, his hands moving across his console as he coordinated the attack. "Yeah, probably," he agreed, his tone suggesting he'd heard that criticism before and didn't much care. He pressed a button on his headset. "Brian, take your miners and get behind their main cruiser line. I want you hitting them from the back while they're focused on our frontal assault." A voice crackled back through the communications system. "Copy that, Commander. Moving into position now." The human ships were so much smaller than the pirate cruisers. One of those massive pirate vessels could probably fit 20 human mining ships inside its cargo bay. But that size difference was actually working against the pirates. Their big guns were designed to fight other capital ships, not tiny fast-moving targets that kept changing direction and speed. The human craft used every bit of cover they could find. They would hide in the rings of ice and rock that circled Epsilon 7, waiting until a pirate ship came close, then burst out to attack before diving back into cover. The pirates would try to chase them, but the humans knew this territory. They'd been living here, working here, flying through these ice fields every single day. When pirate fighters tried to pursue the human ships into the rings, they found themselves flying into pre-positioned mine fields. Explosions blossomed throughout the ice, each one taking out 1 or 2 pirate craft. The humans had been planning for this. They'd prepared the battlefield before the enemy even arrived. On the holographic display, Kreloth watched as 2 pirate cruisers suddenly exploded from the inside. One second they were firing weapons and trying to coordinate their fleet, the next they were expanding balls of fire and shrapnel. Then 3 more cruisers went up the same way almost simultaneously. A young woman at one of the tactical stations called out a status report. Her name tag read Helen Ross. "Commander, the pirate formation is breaking apart. Multiple vessels are attempting to disengage and retreat." Hayes leaned forward, studying the display with intense focus. "Show me their escape vectors." Hayes pressed his communication button. "All units, this is Commander Hayes. Do not let any pirate vessels reach hyperspace range. I repeat, do not let them escape. No survivors." Krelotha's translator device made a strange sound, like it was struggling to process what it had just heard. He stared at Commander Hayes with all 4 of his eyes wide with shock. "Did you just say no survivors?" Kreloth asked. "But they're trying to surrender. They're retreating. Under galactic law, you must accept their surrender and take them as prisoners." Hayes finally turned to look directly at Kreloth. The expression on the commander's face was something Kreloth had never seen on a human before. It wasn't anger exactly. It was colder than that. It was the look of someone who had already decided something and would not be swayed by any argument. "Watch what happens next, Ambassador," Hayes said quietly. "Then you'll understand why." Before Kreloth could respond, Beth Clark approached from her station carrying a data tablet. She handed it to Kreloth without saying a word, but her expression was grim. "What is this?" Kreloth asked, looking down at the screen. "We hacked their fleet database," Beth explained. "That's information we pulled from their ships before they even knew we were fighting back." "Read it." Kreloth started scrolling through the data, and with each line he read, his blood grew colder. Mission logs. Target assessments. Previous raids. The Korthax warband kept detailed records of every colony they'd attacked, every ship they'd captured, every person they'd taken. But it was the market listings that made Kreloth feel physically sick. Children. They specialized in taking children. The younger the better, according to their pricing structure. Human children were apparently particularly valuable in certain illegal markets because of their adaptability and long lifespans. They came here for your young, Kreloth said, his voice barely above a whisper. 73 children live in this colony, Hayes said, turning back to his display. The youngest is 2 months old. The oldest is 16. The Korthax came here planning to take every single one of them and sell them to whoever would pay the most. He pressed another button on his console. All units target their engines first. I want them disabled, not destroyed. Not yet. On the screen, Kreloth watched as human ships began systematically hunting down every pirate vessel that was trying to escape. They weren't just shooting to kill. They were shooting to cripple, to trap, to make sure that none of these ships would ever fly again. A pirate cruiser that had almost made it to safe jumping distance suddenly lost all power as concentrated fire took out its main reactor. It went dark and began drifting in space, completely helpless. That's 8 cruisers disabled, Helen reported. 3 destroyed. 1 still trying to run. Send the boarding teams, Hayes ordered. I want their data cores pulled before we finish this. Kreloth watched as small human assault craft began attaching to the disabled pirate ships. Teams of armed humans in combat armor were cutting their way inside. The human ships chased down the fleeing pirates with a level of determination that bordered on terrifying. Kreloth watched on the holographic display as every single pirate vessel that tried to make the jump to hyperspace was systematically disabled before they could escape. The humans weren't just shooting randomly. They were targeting specific systems with surgical precision. A pirate cruiser that had almost reached safe jumping distance suddenly went dark as multiple mining lasers converged on its engine section. The massive ship lost all power and began tumbling slowly through space, completely helpless. Another cruiser tried to activate its hyperdrive, but the device exploded before it could create a jump window, torn apart by a barrage of missiles that had been aimed at exactly the right spot. The efficiency was remarkable and disturbing at the same time. These humans had clearly studied pirate ship designs extensively. They knew exactly where to hit to disable without destroying. They knew which systems to target first, which ones would cause the most damage with the least amount of firepower. Within 30 minutes of the fighting starting, the entire Korthax warband fleet was floating dead in space. Some ships were completely destroyed, reduced to clouds of debris and twisted metal. But most were simply disabled, dark and silent, their crews trapped inside without power or life support or any way to call for help. Brian Tucker, the tactical officer, checked his console and looked up at Commander Hayes. Sir, we have 11 pirate vessels disabled and secured. No functioning weapons systems, no engine power, no communications. Boarding teams are assembled and ready to go in. Hayes nodded once. Send them in. But remind them that we need those data cores intact. Everything else is expendable, but I want those computer systems pulled out in one piece. Understood, Commander. Teams are moving now. On the display, Kreloth could see small assault shuttles detaching from the Perseverance and heading toward the disabled pirate ships. Human Marines in heavy armored suits were visible through the shuttle windows, checking their weapons and equipment as they approached their targets. The assault shuttles attached to the hulls of the pirate vessels like parasites latching onto a host. Kreloth could see bright flashes as the Marines used cutting tools to slice through the reinforced doors and airlocks. Within seconds they were inside. The cameras on the Marines' helmets fed video back to the command center. Kreloth watched as the armored humans moved through the pirate ships with practiced efficiency. The fighting was brief and brutal. The pirates tried to resist, but they were disorganized and panicked. Many had been injured in the initial attack. Their weapons couldn't penetrate the human armor. It was over in minutes. The Marine teams moved from section to section, clearing each area methodically. When they emerged from the pirate ships, they carried computer modules and data storage devices. That was all. Nothing else. You killed them all, Kreloth said. His voice sounded hollow even to his own ears. Every single pirate on those ships. Galactic law specifically requires that you accept surrender when an enemy is disabled and attempting to give up. This is a violation of. A woman in a medical uniform interrupted him by shoving a data tablet directly into his claws. Her name tag identified her as Dr. Rachel Grant, the colony's chief medical officer. Her hands were shaking slightly, though whether from fear or anger, Kreloth couldn't tell. "Read it," she said. Her voice was quiet, but there was something dangerous underneath the calm tone. "Read what we found in their computers." Kreloth looked down at the tablet screen and started reading through the files. At first, he didn't understand what he was looking at. Mission logs, navigation data, communication records. Standard stuff that any ship would keep. Then he reached the inventory lists and his stomach twisted into knots. The Korthax kept detailed records of their raids. Every colony they'd hit. Every ship they'd captured. Every person they'd taken. But these weren't just random kidnappings. There was a pattern. A specialty. Children. The records showed prices, age ranges, species classifications. Human children apparently sold for premium rates in certain illegal markets. Young humans were valued because they adapted quickly, learned languages easily, and had long lifespans compared to many other species. The Korthax had refined their tactics specifically for capturing young humans. Kreloth scrolled further and found images that made him wish he could unsee them. Cages built specifically for holding small bodies. Medical equipment designed for procedures he didn't want to think about. Sale manifests that listed children by age, gender, and physical characteristics like they were cargo. One file showed the Korthax's assessment of this specific colony. They'd been watching the human settlement for weeks, gathering intelligence. The file included names, ages, and locations of every child in the colony. 73 children total. The youngest was a baby just 2 months old. The oldest was a teenager, 16 years old. The Korthax had been planning to take all of them. "They specialize in taking kids," Rachel said. Her voice was shaking now, thick with barely controlled rage. "That's their whole operation. They scout colonies, identify the ones with the most children, then they attack. They came here specifically for our children, Ambassador. For the 73 kids who live in this colony." An older woman walked over to join them. She wore a marine combat suit that was scorched and dented from the battle. Her helmet was tucked under one arm, revealing gray hair pulled back in a tight bun and a face that had seen too many fights. Her name tag read Captain Helen Torres. "We made ourselves a promise when we left Earth," Helen said. She spoke slowly, choosing her words carefully. "No matter how far out into the galaxy we go, no matter how dangerous space becomes, no matter what threats we face, our children will be safe. That's the one thing we won't compromise on. Ever." She looked directly at Kreloth with eyes that had gone cold and hard. "Anyone who threatens our kids, anyone who comes to our home planning to hurt them or take them away, they don't get a second chance. They don't get to surrender and face trial. They don't get to go to some prison where they might escape or get released or come back to try again." Helen didn't finish the thought out loud, but she didn't need to. The meaning was perfectly clear. Kreloth looked back at the holographic display showing the remains of the pirate fleet. Some ships were completely destroyed. Others were disabled and dark. All of them were finished. The Korthax warband, which had terrorized this sector of space for years, which the Galactic Concordat had failed to stop despite multiple attempts, no longer existed. And the humans had eliminated them in 30 minutes using mining equipment and cargo ships. Understanding settled over Kreloth like a heavy blanket. He'd been wrong about these creatures from the moment he'd first seen them. He judged them by their size, their soft skin, their primitive-looking ships. He'd assumed they were weak because they looked fragile. But humans weren't weak at all. They were survivors who'd been forced to become fighters. They were colonists who'd learned to be soldiers. They were parents who would transform into something absolutely merciless if anyone threatened their young. They weren't prey pretending to be predators. They were predators who'd learned to look harmless, right up until the moment they decided to show you their teeth. "The galaxy needs to know about this," Kreloth said quietly. "Not as a warning against humans. As a warning about what happens when you threaten them." Commander Hayes turned away from his console. "Are you going to report us for violating galactic law?" Kreloth thought about the question for a long moment. He thought about the cages in those pirate ships. The sale prices listed next to children's names. The medical equipment designed for procedures too horrible to imagine. "No," he finally said. "I'm going to recommend that the Concordat grant your colony full alliance status immediately. And I'm going to make sure everyone knows that human settlements are not to be threatened under any circumstances."